he was having a holiday with his family, and they were on a cabin overlooking a beautiful lake, and it was sunset, and his 7-year-old son was sitting with him on the veranda looking out, and his son said to him, "Dad, am I here for some reason?" And it was just this sacred moment, and he took this deep breath and prayed and said to him, "Yes, son, you are the only you this world will know.
Yeah.
And there is something about you that is designed to make something about God known in a way that nobody else ever can or ever will."
Love it. Hi, welcome back, everyone, to the Monday Movement podcast, where we have deep conversations with Christians who are called to the marketplace. My special guest has done the Lead Well, Live Well podcast, and we had a great time together. So check that out if you'd like to do that. Nathanael Small, Nato to his friends, is a wonderful, faithful Christian man who has a sphere of influence around leadership. He's a leadership expert. He founded Work to Live, and he also works for the Western University. Do you want to tell us what you're doing around that, Nato?
At Western, yes, yeah. Western Sydney Uni. The headline is I help clever people be commercially smart.
Nice.
So in kingdom speak,
those are different things, aren't they?
Yes, yep. Yeah. And that comes from straight out of Thought Leaders Business School. Is the purpose of helping consultants have viable business models. But in kingdom speak, in a university context, I disciple senior academic leaders.
Right.
In marketplace speak, I educate, I draw out their uniqueness, I equip them with knowledge, attitude, skills and habits, and I empower them, ideally release them to be interdependent with our team because they start being very dependent, and then they start to think they can do it themselves, which is independence. And then they realise the bigger the projects get and the more complex the needs and the requirements, they actually need us.
Right.
So they become interdependent with us. And that's that Covey 7 Habits journey of habits 1 to 3, dependence, habits 4 to 6, independence, habit 7, interdependence.
Right.
In that space. So educate, equip and empower to help them take what they know and to package it up in a way where they can actually confidently go out and engage with the world outside the university and build partnerships.
Yeah.
And partnerships that are sustainable and transformational, focused on applied research and consulting engagements.
Because that's not necessarily an easy role. I know a lot of incredible things are done in universities where some massively capable and intelligent people doing innovative research and cutting-edge research, but trying to take that into a commercial environment is not without its challenges. So you've got an important catalytic value-add role in that.
Yeah. I describe myself as a commercial catalyst in that I'm an accelerant to their journey. And catalysts are accelerants that don't necessarily get changed in the process of the chemical reaction.
Right.
So
so not a change agent which gets destroyed, but a catalyst that remains. I like that. That's a great metaphor for what you do. So tell me a little bit about your faith journey. I know when we talked in the Lead Well, Live Well, you mentioned scriptures and you mentioned your sort of alluded to your faith journey. How did you come to the Lord? Were you raised in a Christian home?
I was raised a Clayton's Anglican, and if you know Clayton's, the old non-alcoholic spirit mixer, the drink you have when you're
not having a drink. Yes.
So my mother had some kind of Anglican background. I still haven't fully pieced all of that together because I haven't heard her stories. But I was christened as an infant, which I think was about them making sure I was in, or my mum making sure I was in.
Yep.
But my dad was an atheist. Churches were for hatches, matches and dispatches.
Yes.
He went to the Billy Graham Crusade in 1959 and wasn't converted, unlike the Jensen brothers.
Wow.
At the one at the Sydney Cricket Ground, which had 80,000 people or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I was raised Clayton's Anglican, christened, was actively involved in the Church of England Boys Society, which is their version of Scouts.
Yep.
And then went through confirmation classes at the age of 11, 12 and got to the end of that and thought, I think now that I've been confirmed, I can choose whether or not I can come. I can take communion. Great. Okay. So I'm in again. But I can choose whether I can come or not. And I'm choosing as a teenager not to come anymore.
Yep.
So I checked out.
Okay.
and that lasted until I was 17, and then I got into university. I was living in Townsville, got into university, the University of Queensland, and got accepted to live in the Anglican Men's Residential College there. Read the brochure, believed that the press that said chapel was an important part of college life. And I think I need to go back just to make sure I know when to kneel and when to stand, and that I remember all the prayers out of the prayer book and all the rest of it. So I did that, and in the 5 years since I've been there, the church had become evangelical, low evangelical for Queensland, but all of a sudden they had guitars up the front and they had these overhead transparencies, and they were these things called scripture and song, and I was a musician, so I kind of went. I was intrigued. And I started on cello when I was 7, and then piano when I was 10, rhythm guitar when I was 15. I'd always sung. And I got a music scholarship in the college as well, which meant if I played in chapel, I got money off my fees.
Right.
So
always nice. Thank you.
So started playing in the chapel, attending the chapel regularly. Now that was for a residential college with a small chapel. It was high Anglican, so smells and bells, very ritualized prayer book. We got a chaplain in my second year who I didn't understand all this at the time. It's only post-conversion, 2020 hindsight. He described himself as a Christian atheist. So he was trained at the Theological College in Brisbane, which was a liberal theological college.
Okay.
And I got halfway through my second year at uni and saw all of my peers. I came from a state high school. Half of our cohort were from the elite Anglican boys' private schools in southeast Queensland. I saw all these guys with silver spoons in their mouths, studying law, engineering, medicine, all the rest of it, guaranteed jobs from their fathers when they graduated because they were following in the family line.
Right.
And they were blowing themselves apart, getting blotto drunk on weekends and having sex with anything that moved. And it's like, I started asking myself, surely that's not what life's all about. I mean, I'm here to improve myself and get a job and go on a work journey. But these guys, it doesn't make any sense. So I started searching. The chaplain gave me some books which I read, and they didn't make any sense. And then I got quite intentional and actually started a relationship with a girl who'd just become a Christian in Townsville. And that lasted for about 4 months and was very intense. And she broke up with me for the right reasons, but stuck with me in the relationship. And that really spoke to me because it was like, okay, so the relationship didn't work. I don't think I did anything wrong, but she's actually staying a friend. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And she started inviting me along to church, which was the local district Baptist church, to the evening service.
Yeah.
So I was going to the morning service at my local Anglican church, the evening service at the Baptist church. And at the Baptist church, that's where I first actually started to hear what the basics of the gospel. Like the Anglican church prayer book service gives you that, but I'd grown up in that, and it was very familiar and comfortable.
Yeah.
Whereas here in a free church environment, I was hearing the gospel every week from a different preacher, from a slightly different angle, and it started to land slowly.
So you just needed that fresh perspective for the revelation.
Yeah. So then in January of 1990, they got a new youth pastor, and when he spoke at his induction, I went, you make sense in a way that I've not heard anyone make sense before. I need to talk to you. So I buttonholed him after the service, said, can I meet with you? Met with him on the Tuesday, had a long conversation. He said, here's some books to read. I took away all these books that had apologetics in them and other stuff, read them, started reading at 3 p.m, was still reading at 10 at night, went to bed, couldn't sleep, woke up at 3, really disturbed, not knowing what was going on. Rang him as soon as it was 8 o'clock in the morning, I rang him and said, I need to come and see you again. And said, look, I think I'm supposed to believe something here, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Can you just explain it to me?
Yeah.
And he then gave me his version of the 4 spiritual laws of the gospel. So starting with Genesis, the fall, the promise of Jesus, Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
And then Romans 3:23, all of sin falls short of the glory of God, the promise of newness of life. And all of a sudden it all landed for me. And he said, okay, now, does that all make sense? I said, yes. He said, so do you want to do something about it? And at that point there was this flash of revelation that said, if I walk out that door, I'm never going to come back because I don't fully understand all the implications of this. But if I accept this to be true, it's going to fundamentally change my life.
Right. This is the moment.
The moment. So he said. So I said, I think I'd like to do something about it. And he said, okay, well, normally what happens is you pray. Would you like to pray, or I can lead you in a prayer, or I can listen? No, I think I'd like to pray. So we knelt down, and I started for the first time of my own volition, not following a prayer book, trying to pray to God. And I got 5 words in, and I just broke down weeping.
Awesome.
So
good.
And there was this profound sense of washing over me, this sense of love, unconditional love and acceptance and forgiveness and grace. And it was that defining moment of justification where all of my sins, past, present and future, dealt with. I didn't fully understand all of that at that point in time. But that was the felt experience.
He's so good, isn't he? Like you essentially took an intellectual path, like, and you read the books and you did all those things, and yet,
and there was an emotional path to it as well, because I'd failed in a relationship, and in spite of all my best efforts, it didn't work, and I was beginning to feel convicted around the Romans 7, the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I hate, I do. And no matter how hard I tried, I kept making mistakes.
Love that.
So there was that growing conviction of I'm trying to make life work and I can't make it work.
That's great. So emotional, intellectual, and then at the moment there's the spiritual experience, which is in that transformation moment, being born again. I love that.
So I got off of my knees, looking through tears. The world was the same, but everything looked different.
Sky was a bit bluer.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So good. He's so faithful, isn't he? And everything we have, everything we do comes from his hand. But we need to go through that transformation moment where we commit our lives and ask for his forgiveness. Almost don't want to move on from that moment. It's such a special thing. But how did that start to impact your life and career and vocation? Did you get a sense of calling or vocation? I know you've talked a lot about previously about purpose and sense of direction.
I mean, the great book that I encourage everyone to try and get a hold of is J. Robert Clinton's The Making of a Leader, because it charts the course of the life of a person's life and the different stages that you go through in terms of formation into becoming a leader. And what I'd been going through at that point in time was sovereign foundations to the point of where I became a Christian. I can mark significant experiences before I became a Christian that were markers as to what shape my life was going to take. So at the age of 14, I went on a 9-day intensive camp for musically outstanding students for kids from all over Queensland. And I came out of that profoundly impacted and thinking I'm going to be a music educator in some form. Hence why I studied musicology and I planned to study education at university. But at the point I became a Christian, I'd done 2 years of my 3-year undergraduate degree, came back, everything had shifted in terms of my thinking and how I approach study and my whole life orientation, saying I now live for Christ. I don't live for myself. I don't fully understand what that means, but I'm hungry as a newborn to find out what that's all about.
It's great.
And then walking across campus, bumped into a guy who was a year ahead of me at college and an older guy who I didn't know. And that guy had actually invited me to do a Christianity Explained the year before, and I'd knocked him back.
Right.
But he was obviously praying for me.
Yep.
And they started chatting. So what'd you do over summer? Oh, blah, blah, did this, did that, became a Christian. And then the next thing they were jumping up and down and cheering and hugging me. And and then the next day he invited me to be in a Bible study group called a Discovery Group, which was with the movement called Student Life.
Right, okay, yes.
Which was then part of Life Ministries, which was part of Campus Crusade for Christ, which people today might know globally as Crew. And in Australia as Power to Change. So I began, as a month old as a Christian, I started to be intensively discipled.
That's great.
Into all the
Sounds like God was on your case, Nato.
Indeed. Yeah. So, and that was really quite profound because it was interesting. I'd become a Christian through the Baptist church, and there was the youth pastor was growing a youth and young adults ministry at the church. And after my first 6 months, I'd been through this discovery group. I'd learnt about assurance of salvation, the scope and significance of salvation, who was the Holy Spirit, How do you walk with the Spirit, keep in step with the Spirit? So all these foundational principles that lay a platform for long-term growth.
Yeah.
Came back home after 6 months, went to the church and looked around and thought, these kids haven't changed at all and they're doing all sorts of really stupid things. Why is that? It's because they weren't being discipled.
Right.
So I locked in on being a disciple as the fundamental thing that every Christian needs to be.
Yeah.
You follow Jesus and you do that intentionally with a community of faith. And ideally you have a small group of people you're very close with who you're mutually accountable to, and you gather together around the scriptures. And one of the last lessons in there was carrying it on to the next generation, 2 Timothy 2:2. Things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, and trust a reliable men who can also teach others.
Yeah.
That multi-generational impact of living beyond you.
Yeah.
So from the end of my first year as a Christian, I had this vision of impact. And in my second year, I started leading my own discovery group.
Yeah.
So it was a greenhouse environment, as campus ministry can often be,
Sure.
where people's faith comes alive and you go through an intensive formation period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So well-grounded, good foundation. As I said, God was on your case. He got you super equipped early. A lot of people, a lot of Christians that I meet struggle with the secular sacred divide.
Yeah.
You've talked, I've known you for a while, that your faith is integrated into your workplace. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see that operating?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think one of the most important things I learned when I was at university and I transitioned from being a student missionary to being a staff missionary. I joined student life at the time and served with him for 3.5 years. Had a guy called Dave Andrews who was trained as a social worker, lived in the West End of Brisbane, deeply immersed in the local community in a movement called the Waiters Union, which was about serving the least in the local community. And he came and ran some training sessions for us in our staff training year. And as a sociologist, social worker trained in sociology, he made this profound statement that really impacted me, saying, Jesus is not a bounded set. Jesus is a centered set.
Right.
And
so what do you mean by that?
Well, the issue is in discipleship and in following Jesus, are you moving towards the center or are you moving away from the center?
Okay.
And bounded sets, it's very clear who's in and who's out. You ascribe to behaviours and rules and procedures and laws and you're in.
Yeah.
But Jesus wasn't bounded, which is why he could relate to the woman at the well, Nicodemus, because the issue was, were you moving closer to him? And
Love that.
it's like when Charles Spurgeon was challenged as to how many of his baptised congregation he would see in heaven. He said, I'll tell you in heaven. So that centered set approach really broke through that whole false dichotomy of the sacred secular divide. There is no divide. Jesus is centered. Are you moving nearer to him or away from him? And if you're moving nearer to him, then your ability to mature and engage with the world that you're called to, because everyone's called.
Yes.
Everyone has a vocation from the Latin vocare, to call.
Yes.
That is uniquely yours, that nobody else can do.
Absolutely.
And the sign of maturity is not withdrawal but engagement.
Yep.
So it's how engaged are you with the world and with the marketplace, because the reality is only a very small subset of people have any kind of call to vocational ministry.
Yes.
And I even hesitate to use those words because I think when you look at the early church, it was all based on giftedness. There weren't titles. I mean, you had the capital A apostles and their teaching formed the foundation. But then you had little a apostles and you had prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers. And it was this incredibly liminal, open-ended, centered set community that spread from house to house and permeated the synagogues and spread from city to city as people felt this missional impulse to go from one place to the other. So to me, this whole thing of business as mission and Christians in the marketplace, we've got to be really careful about our language.
Sure.
Because we're all called.
Absolutely.
And the vast majority of us will spend, I'm contracted 35 hours a week at Western and they get 35 good hours.
Yeah.
I invest 14 hours of my time outside of that in doing other things that I feel called to.
Yep.
But I have a very strong sense of call to Western
Yes.
as a place of work, as an entrepreneur. I have a very strong sense of call to Greater Western Sydney as a region. And I have a very strong sense of call to regions because I grew up in regions. 10 years in Townsville, 8 years in Brisbane when it was a big country town, 11 years in the Hunter, and now 18 years in Western Sydney.
Yeah. I love that perspective because I think we're created unique by a loving heavenly creator, and he's created us for a purpose, anointed us and appointed us and placed us somewhere unique. And that vocation, as you said, is it's unique. Only the person called to it can actually do it. And knowing who we are, how we're built, who he's made us to be, and being authentic in that, I think is a real key to exercising that.
Yeah, there's a beautiful story, and you probably heard it on the Work to Live interview I did on Hope 103.2, where Dan Allender, who's a Christian theologian, pastor, trainer of counsellors. He was having a holiday with his family, and they were on a cabin overlooking a beautiful lake, and it was sunset. And his 7-year-old son was sitting with him on the veranda looking out, and his son said to him, "Dad, am I here for some reason?" And it was just this sacred moment, and he took this deep breath and prayed and said to him, "Yes, son, you are the only you this world will know.
Yeah.
And there is something about you that is designed to make something about God known in a way that nobody else ever can or ever will."
Love that. That's so true. And often, I think often a lot of us will, depending on where we are, where we're placed, where he's called us to, almost build a front because we think that's what needs to be accepted in that environment. And yet the most successful we'll be in achieving, building the kingdom of God, having influence, doing the things that he's asking us to do, is when we're truly being authentic, plugged in and connected with him, and that's allowing that flow of heaven to earth.
Yeah, and you discover that in community as well. I mean, I think that's
Absolutely.
I think it's really important.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
I mean, God spoke into my life when I was in a car traveling to a student life conference. The year I felt called to join the movement as a missionary, and he spoke audibly as we came out over a valley, looking out over this valley of all these trees. And I've only ever shared that with one or two other people because it was so it's like I'd never heard an audible voice before.
Yeah.
And what he promised me, I went, it blew all my circuits.
Yeah.
And
there's seminal moments, aren't they? Those signposts where I think the supernatural should be natural to us.
Oh yes,
and people can put them into theological boxes or whatever you want, but they're special, those moments.
Yeah, look, and the supernatural should be natural. Your natural life should be spiritual, and your spiritual life should be natural.
Yep.
And it's God's in the business of integration. And he's in the business of helping you live a life of love.
Absolutely, and being transformed into his image.
Absolutely,
amazing. I love the way you phrase that, and that's so true. We have a lot of people that are still wrestling with some of these things. How would you encourage people that are wrestling with, what is vocation? How do I, is God interested in my Wednesday afternoon? I don't really get this whole thing. What would you say to them?
I would say that the gospel is about freedom, and a lot of it, I think, getting our thinking clear and that whole Romans 12, 1 and 2, not being conformed to the pattern of this world, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yes.
And then you'll be able to discern what the will of God is, his good, pleasing and perfect will. That transformation, that metanoia, is a complete change in thinking. And we've been given the mind of Christ. We've been promised that. And Christ is the wisdom of God and the fullness of God. And we need to seek him intentionally and passionately to understand who we are, but also to break down some of these false dichotomies. The world loves dichotomies. They love black-white. They love left-right. They love yin-yang. They love and that creates division. God is 3 in 1, and he's this beautiful unity of perfect interwoven, perfect relationships. God's about integration and unifying your life, not about disintegration. And I think if we can if we can have Jesus as a centered set and we can break out of this Sunday-Monday divide. And one of the fundamental things for me that helped me really embrace that is really embracing Sabbath and going deep into the Hebraic worldview. So in my years, I lived my life in seasons. In the business world, they talk about you're focused on the quarter and you want your quarterly results that feed into your annual reports. No, I live my life by seasons, spring, summer, autumn, winter. That's 91-day cycles and those creation rhythms. And Genesis 1, 7 days, a day of rest. And that day of rest isn't a Sunday where you have a sleep in, you stagger to church, you suffer through some kind of experience there. You go home, you mow the lawn, you have a nap, and then you do the ironing and steel yourself for the coming week. No. Sabbath is a day of recreation where you realign yourself with the created order and your place in it. So I've become very passionate about guarding my Sabbath. And
it's a great discipline to have.
Yeah,
absolutely. We do need that. We do need that time. You're touching on a little bit around the relationship between Christians and church. I know a lot of people in the Monday movement or the workplace, marketplace movements have moved away from traditional churches, which I think is a tragedy. I think, the Bible's very clear. We should not give up meeting together. I think ultimately any movement that is embracing the whole notion of vocation, we do need to be plugged into the local community.
Absolutely.
And churches have been going through a lot of trials recently with COVID and, post-Christian environment. And yet often don't really acknowledge or encourage people to go out and do their ministries outside of a church context. What's your experience on that?
Look, I mean, I think we need to break down the Sunday-Monday divide. For me, Sundays is a work day. It's a day when I'm focused on investing in my local faith communities. I receive from them, but I give to them as well. But I do that in a very strategic way. And I think part of the challenge is that our whole construct of church is more influenced by culture than it is by the biblical vision of what church actually is. Because if you look at when the church was founded you look at the life of the early church and how it grew from 3,000 people on the day of Pentecost to 300 million people being the dominant faith across the entire civilized world at that point in time. And to the point where Constantine made it the state religion because otherwise he would have been overthrown. How does that happen? It spread from house to house. It spread like it was a virus. That people got infected with and they couldn't help infecting other people. So these all these fresh expressions are actually rediscovering the DNA of what church actually should be. I remember
radical culture challenging time too.
Sure. And there's a huge opportunity for it because the world is hungry for community. We have an epidemic of loneliness, and loneliness is actually now being scientifically proven to be one of the biggest killers of people in Western culture. So we have something that the world desperately needs, which is a loving, liminal, accepting community where people can connect in and find meaning in relationships and purpose in life. It's just the construct that we've built is inherited over centuries of church's empire off the back of Constantine. The Reformation embedded church's state, where Christianity was becoming national religions. And you had all these battles going on. And we've seen the church taking on the form of the world throughout the centuries. And the most recent manifestation is the mega church with the church's corporation, with the senior pastor as CEO, completely unbiblical. And we've seen the problem of that writ large with fall after fall after fall after fall of senior leader because of money, sex and power. The time has come and COVID has forced this rethink because all of a sudden the Sunday service got taken off the table. And we talked about this it's like chess. You don't know how good a player you are until you have to play without your queen. And the Sunday service was the queen. And as we've regathered, healthy churches are seeing that enforced black swan event as an opportunity to rethink completely how they actually do church.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Wow. Okay. Nato, any sort of last words for Christians who are called to the marketplace? Do you have any disciplines or words of wisdom for them that when you look at integrating your own faith in your work environment?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with your own spiritual walk and ensuring that you've got healthy spiritual disciplines in place.
Yeah.
I mean, that foundation of, do I have a prayer life that's relationally based, founded on acceptance and knowing that my relationship with God is eternally secure and it's about fellowship with Him?
Yes.
Am I keeping in step with the Spirit? Am I praying? Am I investing time deeply in the Word, where it's me and the Word, not listening to world-class preachers expounding the Word, but me connecting and the Spirit of God in the Word connecting with my spirit and speaking to me and speaking into my life? Am I in close fellowship with other believers in a way where I'm seen and known and I'm accountable and intimate? Because if those three things are happening, which are the hubs of the wheel and the spokes of the wheel, and the hub is Christ, then that mission that spoke will naturally form.
Absolutely.
And because we're all, as we've said, we're all called, and the vast majority of people, work forms a large part of your life. And if you're going to work to live, you need to love what you do. And if love is the greatest of these, then whatever we're to work at it with all our heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, for we've got an inheritance in heaven as a reward. It's the Lord Christ we're serving. It doesn't matter what your job is, and a job is largely about being a servant. And beyond a job, you might get on the career track, and a career is about being a steward of what you've been entrusted with. But then if you are continually responding to this sense of call and it's being sharpened and shaped and refined, you'll reach a point in life, and I hope and pray, I believe I'm at this stage in life where I'm experiencing this convergence, where all of my life experience and everything that I've ever done is now being repurposed and reoriented and refined into a very, very focused call to the marketplace.
Awesome.
And the contribution just becomes more and more strategic, and hopefully, just like 2 Timothy 2:2, it becomes intergenerational. And I do stuff that shifts the needle for my daughter's generation and for the generations to come.
Awesome. What a wonderful place to finish, Nato. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today. God bless you in what you're doing in your vocation, and may His blessings be with you more. And as you in this season that you're talking about, where things focus, just pray for His wisdom for you and His clarity for you, what He's called you to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us at the Monday Movement Vodcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you want to know more about what we do, you can find us at mondaymovement.com.